Welcome to Wisdom for Nonprofits, bringing the best business wisdom to the nonprofit world. Proven leaders share their experience, insights, and best practices. Finally, a podcast for the busy nonprofit professional. And now, your trusted advisor, Bettina Meyer-Flug.
Ask yourself the following questions. Are my board members passionate about the mission, understanding of their role, turning up to meetings, helping at events, doing fundraising, or even donating? The hope is you can say yes to the majority of this because these are fundamental responsibilities of any board. And yes, of course, boards come in many sizes and shapes. Some are deeply engaged, some are decidedly less so. Some involve themselves in the organization intricacies, and some takes a hands-off approach. But ideally, your board will be well-rounded, inspired, and working towards your organization's mission in partnership with you, your staff, and your volunteers. If some of these primary criteria are not occurring within your board, it's time to look at how to improve them. As you know, I've been involved with nonprofits for more than 20 years. Here in the United States, there are several nonprofit consultants organizations. Recently, I was participating in one of these meetings where nonprofit consultants share best practices, and I had a chance to learn specific ways to engage with board members with a specialist in this field called Nancy Bacon. So I invited her to be here with us today. Nancy is a co-host of the nonprofit radio show, a teacher, instructional designer, a learning strategist who has worked for over 25 years in the nonprofit sector as well. She works with nonprofits, associations, and networks to strengthen how nonprofits serve their communities. She has trained thousands of people in person and online, speaks on learning and leadership, and writes books and blogs on topics at the intersection of learning and nonprofits. Still, one of the most recent launches is this excellent training for board members. Today, we're going to be talking on how to build and sustain a powerhouse board. Welcome, Nancy, and thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge.
Thank you for having me. I'm so delighted to be with you.
First of all, we would like to learn a little bit about your journey. Can you tell us how you got involved with this segment?
I sure can. You know, I stumbled upon it that I was going to be an investment banker when I got out of college. I was going to travel the world and all of that. And of course, I did begin in kind of an international business job. But the first Persian Gulf War kind of ended a lot of international travel and business. So I landed in a nonprofit. And I realized then, and I really believe now, that nonprofits are driving really everything important and good in our communities. And I feel that this is really an exciting place to be. So it brings together my passion for social change and my interest in how do we create organizations that are really powerful and impactful.
And you're in Seattle, if I'm not wrong, isn't it right?
I am in Seattle, and it's a sunny day, shockingly.
A few weeks ago, I've been there, and I noticed it was raining, like you said, bring your umbrella.
Yes, it rains a lot, but the secret is that we actually get less rain in Seattle than in New York and many other places. It's just constant. But I'll tell you, July is beautiful, so the sun is out.
So you don't limit your work in the area that you are. You really support nonprofits all over the United States. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. I have clients all across the US, and I want to be clear that I'm a nonprofit educator. So I'm not consulting directly with boards. I get called often for that kind of help, but my specialty is really around teaching boards. So creating classes and learning opportunities that really ignite the passion that board members have for their work. So I work with clients all across the US. Some of them are boards, some of them are not. But all of it is really around this idea of nonprofits and public sector work as drivers for social change.
Oh, that's great. I think the first challenge someone who is creating a nonprofit is to create their board members.
Oh,
How
sure,
to
yeah.
find and recruit and inspire board members.
Yeah. So when you're just starting a nonprofit, you tend to gather your friends and family. You're so passionate about something that your passion is contagious. And so your family and your friends and your community, your neighbors, they sign on to join with you to implement that passion. And that's great at the start. And as you grow, hopefully you're able to expand beyond friends and family, right? If your mission is really worth its salt, as we say, then other people, not just people connected to you, should be interested in joining your board.
Yeah, you should start looking for people who can add value, like with their own knowledge and also
Mhm.
supporting your nonprofit in different ways.
Mhm.
So you mentioned you're a specialist in adult learning, and I saw some of your trainings. How did you bring this knowledge to your board member training?
Well, in different ways. So the first just fundamental piece about boards is Simon Sinek captured it with start with why. And it's really that journey between know why you're doing what you're doing and then what you're doing and then how to do it. So that's a progression we use in training. It's also a progression that makes sense to boards. So start with your purpose, know why you're doing what you're doing, and pretty much everything flows from there. There's a
Mhm.
second uh, kind of nugget that I use regularly, and that is what are the barriers to people taking action? There's four main barriers. Like if you say, Nancy, will you go do this thing? There's four things that might hold me back from doing it. And they start far outside your body and they come deep into your body. So it could be the environment, the culture, the space is not conducive to me doing something. It could be I lack a tool like a checklist, an agenda, a sample. It could be
Mhm.
I don't know how to do it, or it could be my emotions. I don't feel confident, I don't feel comfortable. And we often forget that board members face these same barriers, so they themselves could not feel that it's part of the culture for them to take action. It could be that they need a tool to take action. It could be they don't know how to take action. So, for example, we regularly ask board members to fundraise, go raise some money. Hey, we have
Uh-huh.
a fundraiser coming up. Go, bring your friends. Get them excited, and we assume that they know what that means. We
Uh-huh.
assume that they understand your budget and all that, and then, of course, emotions. We assume that they feel comfortable and confident, and so often they don't. So
And
that's
as an executive director or a founder of nonprofit, how can we create this excitement? How can we share the culture? How can we provide tools and also this emotional support that the board members need?
I think the first thing is just to be aware. First thing is to just know it. We get so frustrated when somebody else doesn't do something, and we often forget that we can change ourselves so they change themselves. So the first step is just awareness to say, oh, my board members aren't doing X. Let me take a step back and let me understand what are some of the barriers that might be holding them back. And when we understand those barriers better, then we can offer the tool. We can adjust the culture or at least have a conversation about it. We can practice with them so they feel confident. We can provide a training like even this conversation. Like take a listen to this conversation and then let's build on that knowledge. So it starts with awareness and then from there it starts with following up on that awareness by addressing the barriers holding them back.
I totally agree. I think it's very important for us to put ourselves in their shoes first. What is the infrastructure you need to really thrive as a board member? So,
Mhm.
bringing and knowing more about the human behavior helps a lot be more efficient, don't you think?
Mm, absolutely. So there's this other area that I lean on a lot, and that is that we know board members are volunteers and we know they work part-time as a board member. So they are also, employed in a job, they have families, they have community, they have a whole bunch of other stuff they're doing. outside of their board service. So, with that, when we think that they really spend a tiny part of their life thinking about our organization, then we can lean into the forgetting curve. Now, that's something we talk about all the time in adult learning, that we all have a forgetting curve. You remember something while you're learning it, and then the second that training is over, or you finish the book, or you stop watching that movie, you start forgetting. So we might introduce something at a board meeting and we assume they're going to remember. And then when they don't remember, we get mad at them. A different approach might be to understand that they're not going to remember. So how do we, one, make it memorable? How do we, two, consider ways to make it a habit? There's so much great literature on habits and how if we can make something a habit, then it's more likely to happen. So I think about finance, for example. Whenever finance comes up at a board meeting, people get very quiet and the treasurer does all the talking and other people sit back and don't participate. How do we make it a habit that they're engaged in that, right? So those are some of the ways that we can increase board engagement by leaning into this idea that they will forget and we can help them to remember.
I like what you mentioned about tools. It's super important to have a tool in place where everybody has access. One of my specialties is Salesforce is one of the options that nonprofits can use, but having a tool in place where you can, for example, after a meeting, include the minutes of the meeting, you can create tasks, you can give the board members access to your clients, to your volunteer database. It's super important. And also train them so they feel confident enough to use this tool that you're providing.
Absolutely. It just seems like I like to ask people when they come to trainings of mine, okay, there's this thing, nonprofit advocacy, for example. What are all the tools and all the pieces of knowledge you would need to actually do that? And they tend to make a really long list. But then with their own thing, they tend to forget that list. And so we want to make sure, yes, absolutely. If you're having a fundraising event and you want them to connect with volunteers, make sure they have a list of volunteers or they can access the Salesforce database to look at your volunteers. Absolutely.
And something I apply with my clients that I think it's super important is that don't think that everybody works the same way. Everybody's different. Maybe if you have a very good communication with your board members and understand what is the best tool, what is the best way you can support them on this journey will be great. Some of them will like to have phone calls with you. Some of them like to have written notes. I don't know, someone who like recordings, but you should ask what is the preferable way of communicating and helping them remember.
Absolutely. And one of the more controversial pieces that people struggle with is we think that people have learning styles, but they don't. That's been completely disproven. We as human beings do not have learning styles. We do all have all of those learning styles. So we talk about I'm a visual learner, I'm an auditory learner, I'm a kinesthetic learner. Well, you aren't. As much as you might prefer something, you aren't truly learning in that way. But the good news is we are all of those things. So what does that mean for boards? It means if you're presenting everything in writing, then liven it up with something visual or something kinesthetic where you get them up out of their seats practicing it, right? So we tend to put a lot of stuff in writing, like read my board report, read my financials, read my this, read my that, read my annual report. And they're not reading any of it. So mix it up, put it in different forms.
I'm using a lot a new tool called Loom that allows you to record quick videos with your face on the computer. So easy, you can navigate and show things. This is another tip that maybe you could use in your nonprofit. It's free and it can help a lot. Sometimes people don't like reading anymore, but receiving a quick video on their phone to remind them about an event, a fundraising with instructions that might be helpful. But let's talk a little bit. Why does board service matter so much in your point of view?
Let's back up and think about what are nonprofits and why do they exist? And nonprofits are doing such important work. And if we really back up, we think about it, they're doing work that government can't and businesses won't.
Mm-hmm.
Nonprofits are doing the hardest work in our communities. The people who are shepherding and stewarding and guiding that really hard work are the boards. So our boards have to understand that one, this is super important work. And two, they need to be fully engaged in the work in order for our communities to thrive. So it is at that existential level. I know that's kind of deep and meaningful, but it's, this isn't, oh, I just serve on the board and isn't that cute? This is serious business in terms of how our communities thrive. And so that's why nonprofits are so important and board service is so important.
As you mentioned, people does this on the side. Normally they have their job, but they really need to engage as this was like a real work. Could be a part-time, but it needs to be something that someone that really can engage with your organization, don't you think?
Absolutely. And there are ways that we can make it easier. First of all, I think board members are carrying so much weight, perhaps too much weight. But I also think that we as nonprofit kind of staff members and people who support staff members, we can make this easier on our boards. We tend to expect too much of our board members, I think, in terms of the worker bee work of a nonprofit. And we tend not to spend enough time on the brain work. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, a board member is attracted to board service because they love the mission and they offer a unique perspective, knowledge, whatever, that we really need to tap into. And too often I see you bring this diversity of board members into the room, but you don't tap into their wisdom in order to make your nonprofit stronger.
Yeah, maybe they can bring new inputs if you allow them to do so, not just putting them inside a box and, hey, you're the marketing board member, you're the finance, and maybe they have some expertise in other areas that they can add value to.
Yeah, there's a couple ideas I have there. First is that we tend to think about a board job description as a one size fits all situation where here's my
Mhm.
board job description. All my board members have this job description. I think that's a great idea as long as it's loose enough to have a separate document which is customized to the person, right? So here's a generalized job description. But here's what you're going to do because you're special in these areas. We're going to really ask you to lean in on that. So embrace the tension between uniformity and customizing to the board member. So I think that's the first thing. I mean, people go to a board training and they're like, oh, we're supposed to have job descriptions. So let's have a job description. And that says that we all have to do the same thing. But
Mhm.
that directly defeats the fact that each person comes with a specialized knowledge, skill, or perspective, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yes. Personalize after you know what this person can add as value
Mhm.
to the organization. It's huge. So your
Yeah,
training will help executive directors and nonprofit founders to train and guide their board members to do their job, or this will benefit their executive directors and staff as well.
it benefits anyone. I created this course that I deliver for board members and those who work with them. So it speaks primarily to board members, but anyone working with a board member, so that might be an executive director, it might be a program director, anyone who directly comes in contact with the board, I think together they need to form a common language about what that job is, right?
Mhm.
It's not enough just to train the board if the executive director is still doing kind of an old time leadership model. We've got to get everybody on the same page.
Mhm. Talking about being on the same page, COVID impacted a lot of nonprofits, including the behavior of the board members. The in-person meeting probably was minimal. Can you bring your perspective on this topic, how COVID impacted the board member relation with the nonprofits?
Yeah, I think COVID exacerbated whatever existed prior. So if you had, a kind of weak board going into this, it probably really struggled through COVID and probably is really struggling now. If you had a strong board going into COVID, one that had intentional meetings and really brought in the best of your board members every time, you probably just coasted through COVID because you weren't meeting in person, but you're set up for success now. But no matter where you were, now is the chance to set new patterns, because there were some pretty lackluster board meetings prior to COVID. Let's be honest. We've had some pretty nonprofit people like meetings, and they tend to have a high tolerance for bad meetings. Don't you think?
Yeah, I'm part of a committee group at the Scout Troop, and it's hard. A lot of meetings all the time.
Yeah, meetings all the time, and not necessarily meetings that make you progress, right? They're just kind of meetings to meet.
Yeah.
So I think now is a good chance to rethink why we meet, how we meet, can we keep meeting somewhat online? When we meet in person, how do we make sure that social connection is really prioritized? In my course, I offer a meeting agenda that is, I think, really pushing on how to have meetings that make progress. And in it, I invite people, one, to think about what progress they're going to make. And two, I invite people to think about what energy level is needed for each element of their meeting, and to prioritize high energy engagement at the top. Because how many meetings have you gone to that start with some committee report, and then we have the financial report, and it's wah, 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 wah. And then at the end, they're like, oh, we have 15 minutes left to talk about our new strategy.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I'm like, no. You put the strategy at the top, and all those reports, you either record them on Loom, like you suggested. I thought that was a great idea. Record things that don't need conversation, and then keep your time together for things that do need conversation.
I love it. There is an amazing book called How to Save an Hour Every Day, and the author really gives a suggestion on shrinking the meetings that you normally plan for an hour to 45 minutes. This leaves you enough time for you to check in and check out, and then you're going to be more efficient during this time. So if you can be efficient on your meetings, I like your idea. Let's go straight to the best point. That's a good idea.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of the book Priya Parker, The Art of Gathering. And so if folks want to read more about kind of how to create gatherings that are intentional, Priya Parker is the guru in that. And I think you touched on something that is so important, and that is taking time to build relationships. That so often we come into the room, we sit down, and we get right to business, and you work through your agenda, and then you all go home. And then you have that conversation in the parking lot because you didn't actually get to have a free conversation in the board meeting.
Yeah.
Spend time building those relationships. You're going to have to make tough decisions, right? So get to know each other.
And just for a peek, can you give us some tips for helping board members find more joy in their role?
Yeah, I think the first piece is really to know what brings people joy, right? Again, that goes right from getting to know each other. That if I know, so for example, I think of one board member who joined a park, a parks and recreation board, and they all love to hike, and she loved to hike. And so they would start every meeting talking about their favorite hike. That's a great opportunity to lean into what people love. So I think first thing is know what brings people joy. I think the second thing is to really lean into emotions generally around confidence and connection, and that emotional connection with people, because that's also what tends to bring people joy, is if they feel connected to the purpose of the organization, connected to the work, and connected to each other. So spend time in that area.
Yeah, I think the emotional vibration of people is super important. And one of the questions we can do to elevate the vibration of the people is, tell me one thing that you're proud of that happened this week. something that they achieve, that they're proud. This will bring them to a different emotional vibration, and then you can start from there.
Mhm. I love that. I mean, I'm a big believer in starting meetings with, not just what's your mission, but how have you seen our mission at work in the community this week? Or how have you seen nonprofits generally? One of my favorite things to do is to drive through a small town in a place I've never been. And I look around and I try to spot the nonprofits. So you look around and you see the Humane Society and you see the Red Cross and you see the thrift store from the Cancer Association. You might see a sign for the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts. You see the sports leagues. You see a sign for some health and human service nonprofit. And I think that's where we have joy, where we're doing important work and we see that connection around us.
Yeah, I agree with you. So this training you're mentioning about more members is located in the Nonprofit Learning Center. Can you tell us a little bit more about this platform?
Absolutely. So first off, I've trained thousands of board members that I used to travel all across the state of Washington in small towns and big towns delivering board training. And so I took everything I knew and experienced and I updated it with what's happening with equity issues and finance issues and things like that. And I created a board training that lives on the Nonprofit Learning Center. So that's nonprofitlearning.center. And so essentially, I took what I had been delivering in person and I chunked it down into an on-demand learning experience. It has a phenomenal workbook, 27 pages of space to capture your ideas and to go from there. So some people say the workbook alone is worth it. It's available in English and in Spanish.
That's great. And the cost is really accessible. I think it's $50 per person, but you offer also packages, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's a whole board rate of $250. And so a lot of people that's actually the preferred way to buy it, where you buy it for your whole board. That shoots a little email to me to say, send you a discount code. So once you buy it for your whole board, you'll get a discount code for your board. And you can use it for your staff as well. I think it's more powerful if everyone on the team gets the training, right? So if just one person gets it, then you're going to be speaking a different language than everybody else. So our hope is that whole boards buy it, and that's been preferred up until now.
And you said the workbook, it's included, and it's very important, and it's also a 2.5 hour training as a whole, isn't it? So it's not that long. So if people can stop an afternoon to do that, that's enough, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It's 2.5 hours of video, but all along the way, I invite you to stop, pause the video here and do this exercise in the workbook. It also chunks out well that you could bring it into your board meetings in the sense that you could say, hey, everybody do the first module, and then we're going to talk about it for 10 or 15 minutes at our next board meeting. Bring your workbook, which is going to have your notes in it. So it lends itself well. We say in the adult learning world, people learn in 3 places. They learn alone, in peer groups, and in classrooms. And so everything we do is trying to capture that peer group learning.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Like embed this in your meetings, that will be great. So you have the engagement on the training as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much to talk about. I mean, in the course, I'm bringing up some ideas that you're going to want to talk with other people about. So it's built to do that with.
And how did you come up with the idea of creating this platform?
Well, so I work with a graphic design partner, and we've been wanting for a long time to take our learning programs and put them in an on-demand format. The issue is there's not enough board training out there. A lot of it is very expensive. And so often we're telling boards to hire somebody, hire a consultant, whatever. And that can get expensive. And those consultants don't exist in many of the rural areas in which I work. So slowly I've been taking my curriculum, putting it in an on-demand format, really, really mission-centered, making sure board members all across the country, particularly in rural areas or small nonprofits who can't afford a consultant, I want to make sure that they have access to good training.
Wow, that's a great idea. It's very accessible. I know you're also part of the nonprofit radio show. Can you tell us what topics you guys cover on the show and how it works?
Sure. So I created the nonprofit radio show 3 years ago with some partners. My co-host is Sarah Brooks. She's wonderful and she's a practicing executive director. So we bring two different perspectives to the conversation. We actually just finished a two-part series on boards. And we were being asked so much for board training that we did a two-part series. The first part is for board members, and the second part is for staff members who work with board members. But essentially, we're now on our 52nd episode, and we take whatever anybody asks us and we turn it into a podcast. So I've been asked a lot about who can help, like how do I find help for my nonprofit? And so that's our next episode coming up. But we have episodes on finance and fundraising and all sorts of stuff.
That's great. And how people can find this radio show?
It's easy, nonprofitradioshow.com. And that will bring you to all of our episodes, and you can just subscribe there, or you can subscribe on all your favorite podcast methods.
That's great. And also, you train a lot of nonprofit associations all over United States. Can you mention some of the trainings that are available and how our audience can find them?
Absolutely. So I really work at the intersection of adult learning and nonprofit. So I train on nonprofit topics, and then I train nonprofit people how to train. So my fall series, I'm launching my Trainer Academy class this next month in August. And so essentially that's how to lead a workshop or a webinar. And that's going to be out on my on-demand platform, as well as a learning series I'm going to launch in the fall. So we're going to be talking about inclusion in the fall. So racial equity, accessibility, and culture and language accessibility. So all that's happening. I do blog occasionally. So my website is nancybacon.com. So folks can sign up for that there.
Great. And Show Me the Money is one of your trainings as well. How do you approach nonprofit finances?
I love talking about nonprofit finance. And this is why. So I remember back when I worked for the local state association, somebody said to me, Nancy, you have to run a training. Fraud is happening. Run a finance training. And I thought, okay, that's not going to work. There's 58,000 nonprofits in Washington state. One training is not going to get us there. And so that's when I really began training nonprofits in finance and really stepping back on what do they ultimately need to know. And so this is where there's a lot of complication in finances. We've made it unnecessarily complicated. And so in my training, we have really boiled it down to what every board member needs to know. And that's pretty simple, isn't it? It's balance sheet, income statement, a little bit with a 990, a little bit with cash flow. But I bring a high level of emotional awareness to the trainings I do. I love starting with a question, how many of you are scared to death of math? There's usually people who raise their hands. And those are the folks that by the end, they're laughing and having a great time, because math isn't that complicated. Nonprofit finances really can be boiled down into some pretty simple ideas if we allow ourselves to just relax and make it understandable to normal people.
I totally agree. And all nonprofit professionals work in a different environment than for-profits, which are always tight on budgets. So learning ways to make it easy, that's huge.
Absolutely. And, to go back to the board member piece, so often our board members come from the for-profit world. So they come into our nonprofits and they don't understand some basic elements of nonprofit finance. So things like, if a donor contributes funding for a certain project, that funding has to be used for that. You can't just spend it in general operating. And so often our for-profit board members aren't aware of some of those restrictions and limitations. And so I think even if you're a master finance person in the for-profit world, a little bit of nonprofit finance could really move you forward.
I totally agree. Yeah, everybody needs that. I'm the one who doesn't like math much.
Right.
There is a big progression from why to how. So how do you, Nancy, help nonprofits to identify their purpose?
I love doing this work because it really is heart work. We nonprofit people are doers. We tend to get right to doing stuff, and that's the how. But when you stop and you really step back and think about why you do it. So how do I do that? So often I can start just from your mission. So what's your mission? So for example, a housing organization might have a mission of providing housing to people in need. And that's their mission. But why do they do that? And so if you just ask so what or why 3 times, you just drill on it more and more and more. So why does that matter? It matters because housing is a barrier to people. Why do I care about that? Housing should not be a barrier to people living within our community, that our community depends on everyone being housed so that we can move forward and have the community we want to have. As you drill down into why, quickly it becomes apparent that the organization moves out of the sentence. It becomes about the issue that housing is a basic right that everyone in our community should have. And that becomes super powerful because when you get to that purpose, that's at the center of your work. And your mission is a piece of that. So you might be providing emergency housing, or you might be providing low-income housing, or whatever. You're providing a piece of the puzzle. You are not the entire puzzle. And once you discover that, then all of a sudden your partnerships come out of that, your board comes out of that, everything comes out of that.
That's great. Oh, and let's refresh everybody here how they can access this board member trainings and what is the step-by-step to implement this in the organization.
Yeah, so first go to nonprofitlearning.center and decide if you want to buy it individually or for your whole board. From there, do the course. If you're doing it as a full board, somebody should take charge and coordinate who's doing what. So for example, a few people just bought it last week, and we're entering in the summer when board meetings become flaky, and that's fine. Everyone should take a vacation. So what my guidance is great. It's now July. Take the month of August to take the course, do the workbook, fill it out, and we're going to get together the first week of September, and we're going to do a debrief on the course, and we're going to talk about it. So that's one really good way to do it. Give folks about a month to do the work and then come together and do a debrief on it. You can also spread it out over time. So you could say, okay, everybody do module 1. You have 2 weeks, we'll check in at our next board meeting, and then you do the next module and the next module. But above all, I think somebody should be the coordinator so that it all just kind of moves forward and people know what to do.
Yeah, that's great and easy. Thank you so much for putting this together. I think this is an amazing tool available for any nonprofits who really want to take the best out of the board members. And if you guys want something to strengthen your relationship with your board members, I offer a relational intelligence training. It's 5 Fridays for 4 hours. We do a certification on that, and we can go in person to your nonprofit as well. It's a training that will help you identify the best skills that each person has in your organization and learn how to work with each other. So you can check it out on my website, witchy.tech, and everything that we talked today will be on the description of this podcast. Thank you, Nancy. I know that time is the most valuable thing we have in our lives. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and being here with us today.
Oh, it's been such a wonderful experience. Thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom for Nonprofits. To hear past and future episodes, please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast channel. We appreciate your reviews and suggestions for future show topics. If you have a question or a suggestion, please write to us at podcast@wity.tech. More resources are available for you at our website, wity.tech. And please join us in the Wisdom for Nonprofits group on LinkedIn. Wisdom for Nonprofits is copyright 2019 by Bettina Meyer-Flug and wity.tech. All rights reserved.